Is it possible that poltergeist activity may have a more prosaic explanation? Is there some validity to the theory of recurrent, spontaneous psychokinesis that has been posited by some parapsychologists, or is it directly tied with haunted activity? Are there things that you can do to help reduce haunted activity in your home, and is it possible that there may be haunted activity and psychokinesis phenomena going on at the same time within a location? Join me and longtime paranormal investigator and ghost and poltergeist consultant Randy Liebeck as we examine his research and investigation into poltergeists and haunted activity.
Hey, joining me tonight is Randy Liebeck, and Randy is a research specialist, field investigator, and journalist covering the field of ghosts and poltergeist phenomena. He is also a career law enforcement officer and national security operations specialist working for the government. He utilizes a combination of cognitive investigative skills and the latest in technology. He has conducted haunted house investigations throughout the U.S. and the U.K., and he's had cases referred to him by individuals, universities, government agencies, and parapsychological research organizations. Randy has served as a consultant on ghosts and hauntings for popular TV programs like Sightings, and a writer for Unknown Magazine, Ghost Magazine, and Fate Magazine. And as a consultant for several TV programs as well around the world, including Unsolved Mysteries, Dead Famous Ghostly Encounters, and Unexplained Mysteries. Randy also is on the lecture circuit where he talks about ghosts and hauntings, and has taught a course on ghosts and poltergeists at St. John's University. Randy, that's quite a resume. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My pleasure, Curry. And you got my name almost right. It's Randy Liebeck.
Liebeck. Okay. Yes. I apologize for that.
I've been
wondering if I was going to murder that or not. Yeah. Hey, Randy, it's great to have you joining me. And that's an impressive background you've got there. So how many years total are we talking about that you've been involved in investigating the paranormal?
Since the late 1980s, I've been doing active field investigations. I've been an armchair researcher going back to the 1970s.
Yeah, that's a long time, and that was a much different time in the 80s. It's with all the shows and everything that are now on, it seems like people are a lot more open to this stuff. Back in the 80s, maybe not quite as much. I don't even know some of the shows that may have been on back then. I don't think there were really that many paranormal shows on back at that time. And it just seems like maybe people weren't quite as open to this stuff. I'm wondering if you get your take on that, where you see
it's a cyclical phenomena, not psychical, but cyclical phenomena as far as public interest and media coverage on this. Back in the late 1960s, which I certainly lived through, there was a widespread cultural fascination with the paranormal, with the occult, which manifested itself mainly in books. Any bookstore, any magazine, countless stories of paranormal phenomena, ghosts, demonic possession, things like that. That fascination in the public eye lasted until the mid 70s, then kind of died out. The 80s were a very dry period as far as public interest went. And then a resurgence came in the 1990s, specifically tied in with the X-Files, which caused another wave of public interest. In the 1970s, late 70s, the only real show covering this kind of stuff was In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, which ran for about 3 seasons, 76 into 1980. Was a great show, covered the full range of Fortean and paranormal phenomena. But then after that, it was a dry spell until the X-Files. Then there was a show, Sightings, which lasted for several years, and a couple of knockoffs, Encounters, Paranormal Borderline. And there was a big wave of interest in the mid to late 90s. And it died out again in the early 21st century. But then that switched again when Ghost Hunters hit the air. And that has spawned an unprecedented public fascination and media fascination with these things we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really where I kind of started to pay attention is when Ghost Hunters hit the air. You mentioned Sightings. Now, was that show Sightings one that you actually served as a consultant on?
Yes, I was a consultant for them for a few years. Did Worked actually four field projects with them, three of which were aired as episodes, uh, and was a regular over the phone consultant asked to uh, get my opinion on the validity of certain cases reported to them and give them some background on the phenomena. They would occasionally send me out to a location to see if it was viable for them to do a show on, or whether I thought it wasn't worth wasting their time on. So I was with them for a while. I thought it was a great show. Unlike some of the television programs today, they didn't go out and instigate phenomena. They didn't fake situations. They would send out an investigative team and a production crew, and whatever happened happened, and whatever didn't happen didn't happen. Today, I notice that on all these 10 to 15 different ghost hunting shows that are on as many different channels, every week all these teams go out to different places, and every week on demand they encounter phenomena which apparently is impressive enough to them to make them run around screaming like children in a Halloween spook house. So uh, a little bit different than how I think the reality works, but to each their own.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, isn't it? I've also been involved in paranormal investigating, not near as long as you've been involved in this, but certainly that's not been my experience either. And it is those shows are about ratings, so we all take that with a grain of salt when we're watching them. But it's an impressive, like I said, an impressive resume. You've been doing this a long time. Take us back to that moment where you really got involved with this. Was it an experience? What was it that drove you into this field, and how did you get started in it?
Well, I've when asked this question, I've always told that it was purely just curiosity. I grew up as a kid learning how to read, and some of the earliest reading material I had access to in the house were issues of Fate magazine, which is a publication that covers the world of the strange and the unknown. So I was reading those when I was 5, 6 years old. Um, and that interest just continued. I went to the public library, checked out any books I could find on ghost stories, parapsychology. I was reading stuff about the Duke University Parapsychology Lab, J.B. Rhine, more of the scientific bent of the approaches, along with the ghost stories. As interested as I am in laboratory science and applying psychology and physics and neurology to these mysteries, I also still love a spooky ghost story about a haunted castle, in Scotland. I don't want to leave the romance, part out of it. Um, but and being asked that question so many times has actually triggered a memory from my early childhood. I remember part of it clearly, part of it a little bit vaguely. I was real little, don't know the age, but I was little enough to still be in a crib because I remember I had the vertical wood slats in the crib I was in. And one end of the wood slats was up against the wall in my bedroom. And I remember I would be tapping on the wall through the wood slats, and my mother would come in and go, what are you doing? Why are you tapping on the wall? And I told her, well, because of the ghosts who live in the wall, and they knock back at me. Now I do not physically remember the ghosts or whatever it was in the wall, rapping back at me, but I do remember the conversations with my mother. I do remember between the slats, uh, I would knock on the walls to communicate with ghosts, what I called ghosts. And the one thing that fascinates me more than anything is that at that age, I apparently had some sort of a conceptualization of the word ghosts and what it meant, maybe from watching Casper the Friendly Ghost cartoons. I don't know. Uh, and I have a vague memory of seeing faces in the wall between the slats of the crib. However, it's very sporadic, very vague memory. And I don't think that experience, whatever it was, and again, I was a very small child. The line between reality and childhood fantasy is the edges get blurred when you're at that age. So I cannot say how much of that was objective reality. Uh, but I do remember the experience, and I don't think it had any play on my becoming interested in the paranormal, because by the time I became interested in the field and started reading about it, I had totally forgotten about the faces and the knocking in the wall. But who knows? That might have been something paranormal. It might not have been, and it might have set up some sort of subconscious, unconscious trigger for a later interest to develop.
Now, were you kind of a skeptic in this, or were you a believer? Where would you kind of put yourself on the spectrum before you started doing this? Because for me personally, I kind of started into it, I think, a little bit as a skeptic. So I'm kind of curious where you started from when you actually decided to start doing, I don't know, some may call it casework or paranormal investigative type work.
I was not a disbeliever. A skeptic, I think we should always use a skeptical approach in this. But I had an intellectual acceptance that there was a reality behind some of this phenomena, just from years of reading stories, case histories, reading interviews with people who've experienced things, uh, reports, particularly ghosts and hauntings and poltergeist cases that have happened since, been recorded since the beginning of written history almost, and involving phenomenology, which has been pretty standard across national and cultural boundaries, irregardless of whether it happened, 300 years ago or if it happened last week, whether it happened in New York City in 2010 or if it happened in Uganda in 1653. The commonality of reports, which indicated to me that there is some reality, there is some universal human experience involved here. So it just made sense to me that yes, there is a reality behind it. That did not tell me what that reality was. Is it some sort of mass hallucination which humans at all times and in all cultures are predisposed to, or is it actually some external interaction with us? Whether it's life beyond death, whether it's some sort of interdimensional communication. But I was intellectually convinced, yes, there is something real here. Uh, Once I started getting involved in field investigations, late 80s, early 90s, as I experienced occasional situations myself in the field, nothing where I would come running out of the house screaming, "Oh my goodness, I've seen a ghost," but I've heard sounds, felt unusual sensations, uh, captured anomalies on some of the equipment I use. Enough things have happened over the years that reinforced my intellectual acceptance of this, to that, hey, there is some sort of physical reality to this, and I believe, touched on some of the edges of that with my experiences, and a couple of rare occasions, those peripheral experiences I have had have crossed over a threshold to where they're more than peripheral. I've had a couple of cases in a couple of locations where what I experienced was much more in my face and had a much more profound effect on me.
Interesting. Now, you kind of started reading in books about the parapsychological at an early age, which is interesting. How did that kind of influence your work now you do in the paranormal field? How did that kind of affect it?
Well, it steered me early on into the parapsychological method, the scientific approach to the phenomena. When I was 8 or 9 years old, I remember going to the public library looking for books on ghosts and hauntings, and what I found were books on academic parapsychology. including ESP, psychokinesis, and a couple on apparitional studies and poltergeists. So I went to check out these books to read them. The librarian said, kid, these aren't for you. These are for grown-ups to read. So I went home, came back with my mother. My mother said, give the kid his damn books. So 8 or 9 years old, I was reading, lab reports from parapsychology laboratories, learning about the theories behind telepathy, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, uh, uh, general ESP, all of which tie in to ghosts and poltergeists. There is an interconnectedness between the laboratory studied phenomena and the field phenomena. So again, early on, I'm certain I did not understand everything I was reading at that age, but I absorbed enough of it to understand that, hey, there are universities and scientists and people with PhDs next to their name who study this, who are convinced of its reality, and they must know what they're talking about. So from the get-go, when I would hear of a case, of a haunting, on the news or in a magazine article, my first thought was, aha, could this be recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis? And is there a 13-year-old female focus in the environment, rather than immediately say, oh my goodness, there's some ghost, in the house from, beyond the grave. Though I am very open to the concept of ghosts from beyond the grave, but always at heart, I look at it from the different parapsychological models.
Interesting. Now, you also spent a career in law enforcement. It's always interesting to ask. I imagine you had a lot of different strange things that happen when you're working in law enforcement. Anything that may have involved paranormal phenomena or any potential paranormal experiences while you were working in law enforcement?
Not directly with me. I knew lots of cops who had those experiences, and I worked with one cop who had what we call the blue sense. It's the ability that many people in law enforcement have to detect danger before it happens. And he would be out on patrol. Occasionally, I'd be with him, and just out of the blue, hey, turn down this alleyway or go down this street now. For no reason, and we'd encounter something in progress that could be intervened in. It's just he was just like attuned to these things. And a lot of guys, especially in law enforcement and the military, are. It's a survival mechanism. It's a self defense, personal safety mechanism that apparently bypasses the normal physical senses. Uh, and again, I never had that ability. I've told many people, I'm as sensitive as a brick,
Mhm.
which you can look at that and say that's bad for somebody who's involved in paranormal investigation, or you might say it's good because I'm not going to be colored by subjective personal sensations, which I cannot objectively verify for anybody else's satisfaction. So I'm in the same boat as any other observer is trying to say what is something happening, how can we objectively demonstrate that.
Sure. It makes perfect sense. Can you talk a little bit about, so when you do go into a case and you actually start the process, how do you kind of start getting involved in investigating a case?
Well, when I get notified of a case, whether it's somebody who's experiencing something reaches directly out to me, or if it's a referral from someone else that knows that person, or a referral from an organization or a university, I'll make contact with the reporter, with the experiencer, and ask, okay, what's going on? What have you experienced? Why do you think it's something paranormal? Why are you calling it that? Uh, get some details on when did it happen? How often does it happen? Get enough information for me to determine whether or not it's conducive to being investigated. Lots of people have an experience; it's a one-off. They'll have one sighting of something, and then that's it. I've had people call me to report, oh, they have a ghost in their house. They saw, the ghost of a woman, and their description, sounds like an apparition. But when I ask them, okay, when did this happen? After I get all excited, oh, it happened 2 years ago at the house I used to live in. That's wonderful. That's nice to be recorded for the literature of the field, but there's nothing I can do with that as an investigator. Even if it was recent, I want to see something which happens on an ongoing basis. I'm not going to go running to somebody's house, especially if it involves travel, for a one-off event, no matter how exciting that event was to the experiencer. But if somebody tells me, hey, every couple of days, every couple of weeks, their kitchen table is levitating, or their cabinet drawers are opening, slamming shut and open on their own, or they see, an apparition of a woman passing in front of their bedroom door. If it happens on an ongoing basis, there's a shot at least that I can go there and experience it myself, and be able to validate some degree of the phenomena. So that would be the trigger point. If it's recent, if it is potentially repeatable, and if the environment is conducive, to me going there. Um, so, in a nutshell, that would be it.
Now, when you go in to do the actual investigations, are you working with other investigators, other caseworkers? Do you sometimes go in and do these on your own? Are you working with a team?
I don't work with a team. I'm not involved with any ghost hunting group or club. I do occasionally go out with different organizations as a guest investigator, just to observe and learn what I can learn, and help as I can help. Generally, it's me. In the past, I went out on several cases just by myself. As time went on, though, I realized in general that is not a good practice for two primary reasons. One, if I do encounter something and it's just me to witness it, that's great. I've seen something, I've heard something, but all I can do is tell other people about it. If I have two or three other investigators with me, they can validate the experience. Even if that validation is them saying, hey, Randy, I was standing right next to you when you say you saw this, but we didn't see anything, because that has a certain evidential value also, because some of these events are hallucinatory. Doesn't mean it's made up, but it means that some things happen in a certain spot that only certain people can pick up on. That helps me know if what I experienced was hallucinatory, or if it was objectively physical, if two or three other people saw it. Their other point about bringing somebody else with you is as a safety measure. I'm going into people's houses. I do not know the people. I cannot always vouch for the neighborhood I'm going into. It just makes common sense, and this is from me, who for most of my adult life carried a firearm at all times as a cop. But even big bad tough cop me realizes that it's not good to go into an unknown environment without backup, without somebody else there. Also, if you're going into a location where there are children present, or maybe a lone, female, unmarried female, to avoid any potential, for somebody saying that I did something improper while I was there. It's always good to have somebody there other than me and the report initiator.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you mentioned on the on your website that you do environmental scans when you're going in to a location. Talk about that and what the value of doing that is.
We don't know what a ghost is, and by the term ghost, I'm lumping in poltergeist phenomena into that for simplicity's sake, though they may be two separate things. But we don't know what a ghost is. We don't know how to detect it. We don't know what type of energy is involved. We have nothing that is a specter detector that, to prove that something is there. But we do find in many cases that the ghost, whatever it is, does impact and change the local environment. Uh, There are electromagnetic anomalies in certain haunting and poltergeist cases, localized to the area where people say they're experiencing things. There are temperature anomalies, which may be physically objective, that they can be measured, or they may be subjective, where a person feels cold, but there's no actual change in the temperature environment. So we want to monitor the environment to find out what the baseline is, what's normal at that location: temperature, electromagnetic signature, electrostatic signature, uh, ionizing radiation, ion count in the atmosphere, and then see. And these are all things which people have reported to be manipulated by unseen visitors in ghost and poltergeist cases. So we want to establish the baseline and then see if anything does change outside of expected parameters while we're there doing the investigation, especially if changes in the environment correlate with other activities. If we hear a sound and then there is a spike in the localized EM field, uh, concurrent with that sound. If we have a psychic with us, and on some cases I brought psychics or mediums with me, if a psychic says, "Hey, there's a ghost standing in that particular corner," and if we stick a Geiger counter in that particular corner and it shows ionizing radiation levels stronger than are anywhere else in the house, or stronger than they were when we did our baseline studies, that's a correlation of two different uh, events, and that's what we're looking for. We want to see uh, two or more factors at the same time in the same space, which indicate, hey, something objective is occurring here, which is something that we normally don't expect to encounter in a house.
Now, I think you mentioned in another interview you don't really normally work with psychics or mediums, but have you been able to, on more than one occasion, been able to perhaps, find other evidence that when a psychic and medium is telling you they're seeing something or there's something going on in a specific area, have you been able to actually capture evidence of that around the time they're saying that?
I worked one case with actually two cases for television shows where the TV program brought in psychics to assist on the investigation. And one of them, we had a psychic medium come in, and he was brought in cold. He was given no information about the case, the phenomena reported, the people, or the house. All he knew was the general geographic location. And I can verify that because I was on the entire progress of the production. I was the guy who went and picked him up at his hotel with strict orders not to discuss the case with him. He came in legitimately cold, no knowledge. When we got him to the location, he picked up on the spots where he said people have experienced stuff here, here, and here. Uh, areas where people had not experienced things, in those rooms, he did not hit on anything. He was immediately drawn to one specific location where, for years in that house, people had experienced frightening things, and he picked up on several things, which really struck me as evidential that, hey, this guy really picks up on information they should not have access to. Uh, he also claimed to be a medium and claimed he could make contact with the ghosts or spirits at these locations. That I could not vouch for because he says he's talking to a ghost. I don't hear the ghost. I don't see and hear what he's saying. Uh, However, he definitely had some ability to pick up on information from the environment, which you or I, could not access. Uh, Worked another case, similar parameters. We brought in a female psychic, and she went from room to room. And before we brought her in, I had a floor plan of the house, and there's certain rooms where there was activity. We would mark those locations with an X. The rooms which had no reports of activity, no markings on the map. This had not been discussed with her. she picked up on the rooms where the activity was. She also indicated that there's something in a doorway right now. She said, right now, get your cameras pointed in this doorway to this bedroom. So we fired up a thermal imaging camera. And on the thermal imaging camera, in floating in the doorway between one room and the other, in the doorway, there was a basketball-sized circular uh, uh, image. It was a glowing white field, and on thermal imaging, that indicates that's hot, very, very hot. I put my hand into the field where that was. It felt cold, frigidly cold. And it was cold anyway. It was in January when we were doing this, but this spot I put my hand into was much colder than the rest of the room. And there was a very low level electrostatic tingling sensation. The hair on the back of my hand, stood up. The classical, hair stands up on its end scenario. Then the tingling and the coldness went away, and the thermal imaging camera operator said, "Hey, it's gone," right at that moment. He was hitting the record button while this happened, but the video feed to the recording box, and I think back then it was probably videotape we were using. This is back in the early to mid 90s. The video feed was disrupted, and all that showed up on the playback was static of the entire situation. So unfortunately, no, we don't have the evidence that we can show somebody, unless you want to consider the distorted video feed itself as evidence of something interfering with the systems. But that entire scenario, which only lasted a few seconds, was significant to me. And again, we had correlation between what the psychic said and where she said it was, and then what I physically felt, and then what did show up on the thermal imaging camera. So those two cases, I've worked with psychics on maybe 4 or 5 cases, but those two are the times when a psychic I felt was really useful at the time and the place.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could touch on the historical research aspect of doing an investigation. Do you really get involved in kind of looking into the history, and do you see some value in doing that?
There is value. There is at least anecdotal evidence, and I think it's more than just anecdotal, that there is a historical factor to some hauntings. If a ghost actually is a surviving human consciousness, a human spirit or consciousness which has survived bodily death, and that's what's causing the haunting. It might be of use to find out, if we can, who that ghost might have been when they were alive. Did they die in that location? If the house has been around since the 1800s, how many people have died in that house? What rooms do they die in? What type of deaths were they? Was there a traumatic situation? And possibly a homicide. There is some indication that traumatic deaths may be more predisposed to causing a haunting than people just passing away calmly in their sleep. Though there are cases of that type of haunting also. It's not always traumatic, but we do see a predisposition for that. So you want to know who's lived there, who's died there, under what circumstances. You want to know what was there on that plot of land before the house was there. If the house was built in 1960s, 1970s, was there another house on that land before the current house was built? Maybe the haunting is associated with a previous structure or the land itself, rather than the actual building you're in. So those types of things, at least that level of basic research, helps you, try to get the big picture of what you're looking at. If they were people who lived in that house previously, as best as we can, we want to make contact with them if there's an avenue to do that, and find out diplomatically, hey, did you guys ever experience anything strange while you lived in this house? Sometimes we'll get no, nothing ever happened when we were there. sometimes they go, "Oh my goodness, you've met the ghost too that we dealt with for 20 years," and sometimes people will say, "Go away, or I'm going to call the cops on you," and they slam the door in your face. But it's all part of the process of getting as much information as you can about the location and what's going on. Then you try to piece the puzzle together.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about, I heard you in another interview, you were talking about a very interesting case. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this case because it seems like there was multiple things going on. But it was a case you were talking about in New York there, and there seemed to be some sort of disruption, it seems, when you were talking to the lady about kind of how to deal with the situation, perhaps. And there seemed to be just some sort of interference or something going on there. But I'm wondering if you could touch on that, kind of what was going on early on with that particular case.
Certainly, that was one of for me, that was one of the most interesting and profound cases as far as the experiences. In a nutshell, there's a neighborhood in Dutchess County, New York, where at least 4 or 5 houses on the block have experienced uh, a mild haunting going back at least to the 1930s. We found one witness, elderly lady in her late 80s or early 90s, in one of the houses who remembered back when she was a child knowing about this ghost, the ghost of a little girl who would wander from house to house in the neighborhood. Local legend was that back in the we don't know exactly how far back, turn of the century, 1910, 1920s maybe, that a little girl in that neighborhood had fallen into a well and drowned. We found the well where this supposedly happened, but we could find no records, that this, actually occurred. So I don't know if that's just local, you know, folklore that developed around the haunting, or if it may really be a connection. But people in the neighborhood, going back a long time, had seen and heard the apparition of a little girl walking around, calling for its mother. Everybody knew about it. Multiple witnesses over multiple generations had experienced this. It did not frighten anybody. It was just, hey, that's the little girl's ghost. I hope she finds her mother someday. The town or the county came in one day and started tearing up the street at an intersection where all these houses met at the intersection, and the street was dug up for a couple of weeks. They were changing all the sewer lines under the street. When all that disruption started happening with the physical structure of the road, the haunting changed. People started experiencing more of a physical poltergeist activity. They started, people reported being shoved. They reported their refrigerator doors, kitchen cabinets opening, slamming shut. People reported their glassware, drinking glasses on the kitchen table exploding and shattering as shards of glass. And people started seeing, reporting that the ghost of the little girl, which had been around forever, now appeared scared. And the little girl's ghost, they would hear it at night crying. A little girl's voice in the closet, like hiding in the closet, crying for her mother. So whatever was going on seemed to actually be scaring the ghost a little bit. So I got a phone call. One of the women at one of the houses had reached out, I believe, to Lloyd Auerbach in California, one of my colleagues, and he said, "I'll give Randy a call because he's closer than I am." So I called her up, and she was telling me the story of what was going on, gave me the names of other witnesses at the other houses. So I was trying to determine whether or not it was worth my time to head out there. So over a couple of conversations, she's telling me, she's starting to get really, nervous about this and scared. So I started giving her advice on, well, these are some things to do, which might help you calm down and might make the scary aspects of this, die down a little bit. And a couple of those items of advice were, if the ghost is, scaring you somehow, talk to it. Say, hey, don't scare me. The woman was very concerned because she had 2 very small children in the household, and whatever was in the house was tampering with the child's crib. It was the slats which go up and down to prevent the baby from falling out of the crib, which the mother would always leave up in a locked position, were continuously being unlocked and lowered And so I told the mother, I said, look, talk to the ghost. Let's assume for the moment that's the little girl's ghost, and maybe she is, likes, playing with the baby. Say, hey, don't, you can hang out, you can, talk to the baby if you want to, but don't bring the bed slats down because that could hurt the baby. Also, if you're being scared, if things are happening at night and things were happening at night, which are keeping her awake and the kids awake, I said, well, try talking to it. Say, hey, if you want to, be playful during the day and, talk to me and the kids, fine. But at night, after 9 o'clock, we're trying to sleep. Could you please not do things to scare us that late? Because in various cases, I and other investigators have found that talking to whatever it is in the house and laying down some ground rules or restrictions, uh, very often they will modify themselves to fit in with those ground rules, whether they're actually listening to you or whether your intent is, somehow psychically modifying the phenomena itself. But we were having this conversation on the phone, and it was a normal conversation, just like we're having right now. But every time I would give her a piece of specific advice, like, talk to the ghost, tell the ghost this, tell the ghost that, I heard a very loud uh, electronic static, roaring static noise come over the phone line, which would drown out the conversation both ways. Once I would stop giving that piece of advice and just start saying something else or saying, "Hey, did you hear that static?" Then the two-way communication was back to normal. Once I would say something again, like, "Well, here's something to try." Once I would say that, loud, disruptive static noise coming over the phone line. Uh, it sounded like it was something in the phone line system. It did not sound like she was, standing next to the phone with a tape recorder playing some sort of sound into the phone. It sounded like it was electronic in the phone line. What was fascinating, even beyond that, was she did not hear static on her end of the conversation. Every time that I heard static, she heard a gruff male voice, very rough, and she said she knew it was not my voice, cursing, using foul profanities, telling her she was going to die. And this is what she heard. Uh, when she told me that, she said, Randy, I want you to know, I know this is not you cursing at me. There's no way this could be your voice. And I believe what she said and what she heard because I heard my half of it too, but I heard static. That just fascinated me, and it was a little bit unnerving that something was listening to the conversation and was targeting specifically the information I was trying to provide, and did not want me to give her certain bits of information. And then hearing that hostile, violent voice on her end, uh, that does not happen in most haunting and poltergeist cases. Uh, 8 out of 10, you don't get stuff like that. But there is, 2 out of 10 cases where there is a hostile, possibly threatening aspect to it. So I was definitely intrigued at this point, but a little unnerved. So I said, "Yep, I'm going to come out and see you." So made an appointment. A couple days later, I'm going to drive to Dutchess County, New York, from New Jersey. I get into my car. I'm heading out up the New Jersey Garden State Parkway towards New York State. My car, perfect running condition, had never had any mechanical problems with it whatsoever. I'm near the New York border, near Bear Mountain, and my car started sputtering and stalling. And I pushed the gas pedal down. The car would not accelerate. Sputter, pop, 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 pop. So I figured, oh crap, now my car is crapping out on me. So I pulled over, looked under the hood. Nothing I could see, but I'm not a mechanic. I don't know what I was looking for. I figured, okay, well, obviously I cannot continue. I got to limp the car back home and hope I make it home. So I do a U-turn. I'm heading back towards home, and the car starts working perfectly, no problems whatsoever. And I'm, hitting the gas, slowing down, speeding up, trying to see if I can trigger the malfunction again. No problem. So I keep driving towards home. And I said, okay, everything seems okay. This might have been just some weird one-time glitch. The woman's expecting me. I turn around, I'm going to head back to New York. Uh, After about 4 or 5 minutes heading back to New York, exact same thing happens with the car, sputtering, stalling. Oh, goodness gracious, I'm going to have to, I can't take the risk. Something's going on. Turn back to New Jersey. I'm heading back to New Jersey. I get almost all the way back to my house without any problems whatsoever. I figure, okay, I'm going to be late getting there if I head back, but the car seems fine. I've been driving, for over 40 minutes heading back home without any problems. Let me head back. Actually, I called her first. I got home, called her, said I'm going to be there, but it's going to be about 2 hours, later, and started heading back. Once I left the driveway and was heading back towards the highway in her direction, same thing with the car. That's it. Turned around, called her, said I can't make it. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. I'll call you back and we'll make a new appointment. Um, Took the car to the mechanic. Nothing was wrong with the car. Car worked perfectly driving to the mechanic. And so a few days went by, and I kept, using the car for going to work and doing my stuff. Car worked perfectly, no problems whatsoever. Eventually, I don't remember exactly how long it was, a few days, maybe a week. Eventually, I did try again, went to see her for the first time, no problems. But it strongly seemed to me that something was actively preventing me from going to see her. And that had even more resonance with me, that something was actively interfering with me helping this woman, because this happened just a couple of days after that phone conversation with the static and the voice. And other things happened I worked that case for about 2 years before we were done with it. And some people moved out of the houses eventually and left rather than continue to deal with it. But that is one of the really, really interesting cases I worked on. Never saw a ghost myself. In fact, most investigators who do this, never actually see a ghost. But I think that experience exceeds what a lot of researchers have been able to encounter on their cases.
Now, Randy, you actually experienced some poltergeist activity on this case as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
A couple of things happened. One, and there were two houses that we did our primary investigative work at. There were 3 or 4 other houses in the neighborhood where the residents of 2 of them told us, yes, we do experience this stuff also, but we don't want you coming in, do the investigation. We don't want attention drawn to us. And the other houses, they would not confirm. They wouldn't discuss anything with us. There's the proverbial door gets slammed in your face. Even though the people in the other houses said, yes, we know those neighbors, and yes, they do experience this. They just don't want to talk about it to you. In one of the houses, one of the things that was reported, there was a hanging heavy metal or stone incense burner that hung from the chains from the ceiling, and it would spin apparently on its own initiative, its own propulsion, and just spin wildly. I was not too impressed with that report because anything hanging from a chain from the ceiling, vibrations, a truck going down the road, people walking upstairs, that could cause the hanging incense burner to spin or rock back and forth. We were there discussing that with the woman, and I was telling her exactly that, what the normal non-paranormal explanations could be. And while we were having this discussion, my co-investigator said, Randy, you might want to look at this. And we looked at the incense burner, and it was spinning. Not slight movement, not something that a vibration would cause, but it was spinning in a circular arc. And as we watched it, the arc expanded, meaning that the energy being directed to propel it was increasing because the arc kept going further and further and wider out. Then it came to a dead stop and just stopped instead of slowing down, that would be the normal expenditure of energy and energy dying out. It just came to a dead stop and was just hanging there. So of course, immediately when that happened, we get the video cameras out, point the video cameras at this incense burner, and this is film. And we did that for several hours, and it did not repeat itself. So then we said, okay, let's, we sent the other investigator upstairs. I said, I want you to walk around, run around, stomp on the floor right above this thing and see if you can, make it move. He was up there stomping, running. The incense burner did not budge. So it was not just, a random vibration coming to the house. So that was interesting. And that any movement of objects, physical manipulation of the environment, we categorize that as poltergeist activity rather than haunting activity. Haunting is usually subjective. You'll see something which might be hallucinatory, or you'll hear something or feel something. This was physical. Also, in that case, I got a call one day, and again, this case went on for a couple of years. I don't remember exactly when it was in the in the case history. Well, I got a call about 3 o'clock in the morning. A woman, terrified, says her child's toy car is chasing her around the house from room to room. And while I'm talking to her on the phone, I hear the whining sound of an electric motor, and bang, 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 which she said was the toy car kept slamming against the door, the locked door to her bedroom where she was calling me from, trying to get into the room. So, okay, this I could not get there at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I said, hold on for a few hours. I'll be there, as soon as the sun comes up. So I'm there early in the morning at the house. The toy car has stopped chasing her by this point, but she has the car. It's a remote controlled, electric battery powered toy car. There are 2 handheld remote control units that control it. My first thought was, okay, one of her kids or somebody else nearby has a third remote control and is playing with her and is making this car chase her around. She assured me, nope, the car came with 2 remote controls. That's it. She bought the toy. She had both remotes. Uh, her her child was not in the house. The child was staying with the father in another house. She was there by herself. So I had 2 other investigators come with me when we went to see her that morning, and we're talking with her. Uh, the toy car is sitting on the kitchen table, and we're filming the interview with her as she's describing what happened. As she's talking to us, the toy car, the motor starts running, and the car starts rolling and keeps falling off the table in an energized state. So we kept putting it back on the table, and it kept, going off as you. It was not constant. It would be dead for a few minutes, then it would fire up and start going again. I noticed that the car started energizing and rolling every time while she was talking to us. She would gesture towards the car. She would go, and the car did this, the car did that, and then and it was when she would point her hand towards the car, which was about 3 feet away from her hand. So she was in no contact with it. The motor would start running. So I brought this to the attention of the other investigators. And to keep the car from rolling off the table, we laid it upside down on its back. And the phenomena continued as she would gesture towards the car. The wheels would run, and it had a steering mechanism built into it, which could be controlled with the remotes, which we had in our possession, and they were not being activated by us. And the front wheels are going left and right. And again, we noticed that the wheels were moving the left and right when she was pointing towards the car. So we said, "Hey, Julie, tell the car to turn left." She'd say, "Okay, turn left." Wheels would cut to the left. "Julie, tell the car to turn right." Wheels would cut right. Did not happen every time on demand, but it happened, 2 or 3 times out of every 6 times we asked. Uh, Julie, tell the car to start, and the car would be, dead, not energized. She'd say, "Car, go," and the wheels would start spinning. So we're filming this. Fascinating. Uh, we had another investigator. We were in the dining room, The next room over connected is the kitchen where the stove and the refrigerator were. We had one guy in there set up with a couple of recording devices, including an ion detector. He yelled into the room, said, "Randy, I just want you to know, every time she points towards the car and it starts doing something, about 1 to 2 seconds immediately before that, I'm detecting a burst of ions. I don't know if they were negative or positive ions. I don't know if the device could discriminate between the two, but he said it's happening almost every time. And I noticed it was happening, but I did not until now just make the connection. Hey, it's happening when she makes the gesture and when the car moves, which I thought was fascinating. We're having multiple correlation aspects. The car is moving. It's moving without the remote being used. It's happening when the woman gestures towards the car and even tells it specifically what to do. And we're getting an anomaly in the local environment of a burst of ion activity, which seemed to be tied in with this. One thing that crossed my mind is, well, maybe there is a third remote. Maybe there's some neighborhood kid or somebody, outside the house looking through the dining room or the kitchen window. And, maybe I didn't really believe this, but I had to consider all possibilities. Maybe, he sees when Julie is gesturing towards the car and hears what she's saying. And maybe then he's with the remote, making the car do these things. So we just pulled down the blinds. In all the windows, so nobody could see into the house. And in fact, where the windows were, nobody could have seen where we were sitting anyway. But just to be on the safe side, closed all the blinds, closed the curtains, so nobody could see, and there was no one in the house but us. The activity continued. It looked to me what was going on was psychokinesis from the woman. I believe the woman was making the car move through her own innate abilities of some sort. Uh, it may have been something separate from the ghostly activity, or what I actually think is that the ghostly activity and her PK or poltergeist abilities were intertwined, that there was an existing haunting going on in the house. I believe this woman, who had only recently moved in within the past year, I believe that she was a poltergeist agent and was causing activity, and it just merged with the existing haunting and kicked it up a few notches. No way to prove that, but the totality of the case, that's what I think was happening. So that was, I believe, I witnessed poltergeist activity at play there.
Well, that's interesting because that is one of the theories out there about poltergeist activity, is the psychokinesis aspect of it. And I think you'll get some investigators, maybe parapsychologists, will say they believe in that. Others may say they won't, but it's interesting, and it does make you wonder whether there is some aspect of the psychokinesis aspect to it. Now, Randy, was in this particular case, did the woman stay in the house? What was kind of the resolution at the end of this, at the end or conclusion of your research and investigation into it?
She moved out. Not specifically because she was scared of what was going on. It was just she had just decided that she was going to move out, and but who knows? Maybe these things going on, glassware exploding, in front of you on your kitchen table, uh, activity, endangering the child. That may very easily have factored into the decision to move out of the house. Now, interestingly, after she moved out of the house, the activity followed her to her new house for a couple of weeks, possibly a month. It continued at the new location, then stopped. This happened back in the 90s. I spoke with this woman within the past year. Made contact with her to see how things were going, and got the details because I had not spoken with her since the 90s, and the activity did follow her, which is something that we expect in a poltergeist case where it's recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis being generated by the living person. And in the cases where it does follow a person to another location, the trend is the activity is short-lived. It will, have a couple flare-ups for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, if that long, then dies out. This is exactly what happened in this case, which further reinforces my belief that she was the poltergeist, the unconscious poltergeist agent in this case, who was causing a lot of this physical phenomena to occur. But that still leaves us with a little girl's ghost who had been seen in the neighborhood for decades, uh, or possibly even longer.
Interesting. Now, and I think I heard you say, Randy, that you don't really do any sort of house cleansings, clearings, or anything like that. What is it more to kind of help people validate what they're experiencing? If you're kind of what is the kind of the end result with what you do and helping people with these kinds of cases?
Two practical results. The first is it I'm acting as a bit of a counselor to help people understand what they might be experiencing. And I have to emphasize might be experiencing. We have no black or white definitions or explanations for any of this. There are a few hypotheses and parapsychological models for what could cause a haunting, what could cause a poltergeist outbreak. So I discuss these with the people. A little bit of knowledge helps mitigate fear to a degree. You know what's going on. We're talking about, especially with the poltergeist or psychokinesis, we're talking about abilities of the human mind. We're not talking about, demonic incursion from the pits of hell. Uh, you know, when we explain that to people in the clinical scientific terms, even though these hypotheses are not proven, they're just hypotheses. That takes it from being, something, Amityville horror, demonics, scary, to more in the realm of science. At least it helps. I hope it puts them in that mindset that this is something which is not supernatural in most cases, but it's just something we have not been able to explain yet. But it's still part of science. It's still part of physics. Uh, I also try to put them in the mindset of an investigator rather than just being the experiencer who sits around and all they can do is absorb what's going on and maybe be scared about it. And very often they are scared by it. To say, hey, I need you to be my co-investigator because I can't be sitting with you 24 hours a day. So keep a journal, write down what happens, when it happens, what the temperature is there a full moon outside? What were you doing? Who else was in the house when these things happen? Uh, keep this journal. When they do that and they start, their mind starts functioning as a to document and to act as an investigator. Uh, One that calms them down because they have something else to focus on rather than being scared. And more often than not, it actually does calm the phenomena down, uh, uh, especially if they are subconsciously part of the cause or part of the formula of what's going on through psychokinesis, changing the functioning of their brain from just being an experiencer to being a co-investigator. That seems to have some effect on calming the activity. So part of that is to help the person by reducing the fear factor and making them understand. If nothing else, folks will come out of a case that I'm on at least knowing what RSPK is, at least knowing what a residual haunting is, hypothesis wise, at least knowing, what, a ghost, might be. And they know more than they did before they called me in. The other part of it is I'm trying, there's two other parts. One is I'm trying to experience this myself. I've had experiences like we've discussed, but I actually want to see a ghost someday. That would I accept the validity of this. I believe it's real. But seeing the ghost of a little girl walk in front of me, crying for its mother, that knocks that acceptance of the reality up several notches. And so I think most other investigators in the field, yeah, they'd really like to see the ghost. So maybe on some case I'll be at the right place at the right time And it really is a matter of being there at the right time. The other part is, whatever I experience, whatever we document, to write it down, keep a log, make it available to other researchers, publish it in the literature of the field, to add to the body of knowledge and the body of supposition that we have about what these things are, how they might work, and every little piece you add to the puzzle helps. So I like to think I'm doing my small part as one investigator, adding to our body of institutional knowledge about these things.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Randy, I appreciate you joining me tonight. It's been a fascinating discussion. That's interesting stuff, and that's some good takeaway there, because I think you're really focusing on kind of the objective approach to this and kind of helping people to understand that, maybe you don't have to be as fearful about this as you often find with people. It seems like they have a tendency to want to, get fearful of it right away. You even find some people want to automatically jump to maybe demonic conclusions, that sort of thing. So it seems like a very rational approach, and one that really.
And you know what feeds that, Curry? What feeds that are these television shows where every house these teams go into, oh, you have a demon in your basement.
Right.
People watch that, and then when they have unexplained noises, movement, they see things out of the corner of their eye, that's the first thing they think of, because that's all they've been exposed to. Oh my God, I must have a demon in my house.
Sure.
So part of my job is to have them take a deep breath, take a step back, and let's look at this objectively and see what we really have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Randy, again, thank you so much for joining me tonight. What's your website or any other place where people can find the work you do? Maybe any of the findings that you posted.
The first stop would be my website, which is ghosthunter.iwarp.com. That's ghosthunter.iwarp.com. That has some articles I've written, some definitions of some of these phenomena we've been talking about. As the articles have a couple of the cases I've worked. There's some video clips of some of the TV shows I've done, including possibly one or two of the cases we talked about today. And from there, you can access my email address and a voicemail number if anybody wants to contact me. And they can also find my Facebook page through that website.
All right, great. Well, once again, intriguing stuff, fascinating stuff, Randy. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. And I know it's really late on your end. You're on East Coast, but have a good what's left of the rest of your night. And once again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.